Welcome to the Commercial System Training videos. This first video is on creating new BOP policies. This is the homepage for the 2015 version of Commercial Systems. If you are accustomed to the old system, then you will notice that the main difference is the tile layout as opposed to tabs. Just to highlight a few important parts, we have the search tile, the new quote tile, and the recent tile. And these will be the sections we will use the most in these introductory videos. To begin with, we will go into the new quote and select the policy type that we want. We want to select the package option, even if we are not going to use both auto and business initially, because this gives us the option to add on later. Once you have selected the quote type, you will begin entering information. You see here at the top that we have new insured. This will be until we detail the name. The revision information will tell us how many revisions have been made. In this case, 0, since we are beginning the quote process. On the left, we can see the sections of the quote, or in the future, it will show different versions of the policy. You don't want to jump sections because that will generate errors. Here at the bottom, the Next button will automatically save the information we have entered and take us to the next section. Up here on the right, we have the ability to add notes or attach files. Finally, anytime we see this magnifying glass, we can click and view options that are provided. This will be very helpful later on in particular. As we go through this practice quote, a lot of this will be self-explanatory. We'll just be following the instructions in the system. This is to give you a general overview of the order and questions. We will begin by selecting the company. So clicking on the magnifying glass and select the company you want. Next is the effective date. You can click on the calendar, or you can enter the information manually. It is important not to jump ahead until the information is finished loading, otherwise the system will take you back without saving the new information. Once you enter the effective date, the expiration date will automatically generate. Next, select the underwriter, and there will be a number of options here. All of the grayed out boxes cannot be edited, and all of the boxes with red lines are required. If you have the information for other boxes, it is always good to enter it since this will save us time later, and it may be required information at a later revision point. We enter the insured name and type first. Whatever we put here in the business description will generate on the paperwork later, so be sure to check for spelling errors and to verify that all information is correct. So our name, Fred Smith, and our insured type, going to the magnifying glass first, and selecting individual. When we enter our address, we have a few options. You can begin by typing in the street and the city and the state, but this is a bit of a waste of time, and it is considerably easier to enter the zip code first if you have it, which you should have it. So we go to our magnifying glass here and click search. You can enter the zip, the city, or the state, or all three. So in this case, I will say Wyoming. Now you'll notice that I need to abbreviate it. So I search Y, and then I search my city. And this generates my zip code, which I can then select. This will automatically generate the other information, and I can end by adding the street address. Now this next section has quite a bit of information. It's not required, but again, it's best to enter it if you have it so that you will not have to enter it later on. It also provides more detail for the policy. Now these three questions will vary based on the customer, and some will produce more questions and forms. For the purpose of this video, we will select no for each, just to keep it simple. We double check to make sure all of our information has been entered. Now notice that when we click Next and there are errors, the system will let us know and ask us to fix them. It is best to do this now and not return later because we might not remember what the errors are or what we needed to enter. So in this case, imagining I did not select the Keep Address as Entered button, I will now need to verify that this is the address I want. The system uses a program to validate addresses, and you can keep an address as you entered it or search for a match, but if you want to keep the address you entered, then you need to click Keep Address as Entered. Otherwise, the system will generate an error. We can then click Next, as we're back in progress. This next section is for producers. To begin with, click on Add and enter at least one producer. You can have multiples, but at least one must be selected as the producer of record. Again, we're going to select the magnifying glass and the producer that we want. The remainder of the information will automatically generate, as you can see, and you can't make any changes. However, you will need to enter the email of the producer. Now that we have entered this information, you can see we now have a quote number, and we can use this to search if we need to exit the quote for any reason and come back. Once we are done, we will click Done with Producers, and the system will take us to the next section, in this case, Business Package. These next questions ask you to detail the requested coverages. You can select Business, Auto, or both. The Package button will automatically be selected because we chose this when we started the quote. Now is a list of coverages to determine eligibility for coverage. As you can see, they are all required questions, and we will go through this a little slower so that you can read over the questions. When you have finished, we will click Next. Make sure that as you are going, you are reading all questions and making sure that you click at least one answer, or that you type in some information, because again, these are all required. Now, we double check, make sure you pull all the way down to the bottom of the page, and we go and click Next and head on to the next section. Once we have entered our basic information, we will go through each section to detail coverage. And this first section is the business owners, where we can see the state and the limits. There are magnifying glasses next to the blank, so we can change, and you can also see what limits are available. A little farther down, we have optional coverages. And this will vary based on policy to policy depending on what the customer was requesting. And then we have our policy scorecard. Again, anytime we see the magnifying glass, we can click and search options. Once we select the information, we can click Next, and we'll go on to the locations portion of the quote. So we need to enter locations first and then enter buildings. And this is a good thing because when we enter the location information, we will be able to select it later with buildings rather than having to enter it twice. So we'll start by clicking Add. And we type in the name of the location and enter the location. And it's good to be specific with our location names so that there's no confusion later as to which location we're talking about. Again, you can enter the street address and the city, but it's much easier to go to zip. Typing in all the information is a waste of time, frankly. So it's always best to go down and click on the magnifying glass next to the zip code. Hopefully you will remember your zip code, but if you don't, you can always go and search your city again. So this auto-populates our information, and we can then put in our street address. Don't forget to select Keep Address as Entered if there's not an exact match. As we saw earlier, if we don't select this box, it's going to generate an error. So it's just right there, and we check the box. And our territory information has been generated. Next, we see optional location coverages. Again, these are totally based on the policy. You may or may not need them. We can leave all this as it is, or select the ones we want. Double check our information, and click Next. You can see here the information that we have entered. We can pull the bar all the way over to check our information. We can add more locations, or we can go down and select Done with Locations, which will take us onto the Building section. Again, we will click Add first. So here, when we select the magnifying glass, we will see a location number. And we can select the location that we want. If we had added other locations, they would be available as well. In this case, we have only one for simplicity. And we can see that it has generated our information and automatically named this Coffee Shop 1, which is what we detailed under location. It is also marked this is building number 1. We can now select building, personal property coverages, or both. We can also select mortgage holder information if there is any. We enter our building information, starting with the building description. Again, this information generates to the paperwork, so make sure that you're checking your spelling and being specific. We have our nature of business. We will put in our total square footage of the building. Make sure that you are being exact with your square footage and that you have the necessary documentation to back this up. Under construction type, there are several options. Select the one. And we have our number of employees at the building. Our public protection, fire classification, all of these are required questions. And we're going to select owner here. So we'll need to detail the owner occupied square footage. Which is now available to us. Again, be specific with the amount and make sure you have your documentation. We can also select if it's replacement cost or actual cash value. Next is optional building coverages. Again, this is totally based on each quote and applicant. And at the bottom, we have our building scorecard. So we can choose our franchise type, hours of operation. Some of the information is grayed out and we cannot change. Others, we have the option to specify. When we are done, we go on to Next, and it takes us to our next section. So now we have our building coverages. And we can select our limits and add any additional optional coverages we may want. We're going to keep it fairly simple on this video, just for time's sake, but there are a lot of options and you should be able to find everything you need. So we hit Next. And then we have our classifications. Again, we're going to go to Add first. Now, since we selected restaurants, that's already been filled in for us here. So all we need to do now is go on to Class Code. And there's quite a bit in here. You may need to search around a little bit, or you may perhaps already know your code. So we select our code and just keep scrolling through and double checking that you have all your information. Now we have our liability exposure. We can search our limits for personal property. Then we put in our percentage occupied. And any seasonal increases that we may need, liability optional coverages. Again, this is all fairly self-explanatory. The purpose of this video is just more to show you some of the questions that you will encounter as you go through and the information that you might need to have. It varies policy to policy. It's just kind of an introduction. So once we've entered our information, we're going to go on and click Next. Again. We have our classifications entered. We can always pull the bar over to double check that we have all of our information. And when we are done, we go down and click on Done with Classifications. That is the way to exit out of every section, is done with this section. It automatically takes you on to the next section. So our buildings are done. Now we have our optional provisions. If we have anything extra to add, we will click on the Add button and put it in. Otherwise, we can just go on to the next section. And you may find that there are some sections where you do not need to add anything, and you can just simply go on or hit Done with that section. The following section is the additional insureds or certificate holders. Again, you will click Add if you want to put them here. Please try to be specific. If they are an additional insured or a certificate holder, what exactly is their role? Because the underwriter will be reviewing it, and they can only base their information on what they're reading here. They don't have the communication with the client. So then we have our commercial auto. Because we selected that we wanted to have an auto policy, this is where we will put it. And we have business auto selected for us, and our primary state is Wyoming. We can go and change that if we wish with the magnifying glass, or we can hit Next. We have our state coverage limits first. By now this looks very familiar. It's just more of the same. Our magnifying glass, we have two options because we selected our company. So we can select liability, medical payments, uninsured motorist. Any of these you click will generate more information. So as you see, we checked liability. We automatically here have other information that we have to fill out, like the limits and the deductible. So we click on our magnifying glass and put it in. You might already know what limit you can put in, but this is a nice way of double checking to make sure that we offer it. Now if we want to add med payments, we would check that. And as you can see, it will automatically generate new questions for us to answer. And this is another reason it's important not to jump ahead swiftly, because you might miss questions that are added on because you've selected an option. Once we are done, again, we just click Next, and we have our state coverage limits. These are our covered auto symbols, and you can pull down and find a little bit of a key that tells you what each one is with the description. Right on to Next. And we have our drivers. So we're going to say that this driver number 1 is automatically generated. We're going to say that this is our owner. So we click our box and enter our information, Fred Smith. Now you can select the calendar button for date of birth, but that is really a bit of a pain because you have to scroll backwards. In this case, it's going to be much easier to just enter their date of birth. And you can specify whatever year, 1963 or just 63, it will accept both. Again, a lot of these questions are not required, but it's going to help you out a lot if you can answer them now. That way you don't have to come back and put it in later. Anytime we're dealing with the address, again, you're going to want to select that zip code. Don't bother typing in the street first. Hopefully by this point we remember our zip code, but if we don't, we can always search by that city. And the last thing we have to do is put in our street address. And we have our driver here. We have our vehicles. And you may have a number of vehicles to enter, or you may only have one or two. And it could be very tempting not to enter the information, but at some point you're going to have to. So it's best to get it over with now. In this case, the VIN number, it will be required after the quoting process. So it's really good to enter it now and save yourself the trouble later. Now the year is required. And I can search the make and model of the car that I want. In this case, the zip is required for where the car is housed. The good news is when we use the zip to generate our information, it automatically fills in that territory number for us. So let's pull down here and make sure we have all our information. We see here a few more red lines. And this tells me the size of the vehicle, which seems unusual because I've specified that it's a Camry. So why would it put in trucks? Well, if we look back further up here, we can see that I actually have a vehicle type listed as something else. So I want to make sure that I select the type of vehicle here that goes along with the car I specified. This changes the required questions, as you can see. So then I just have to put in the operator experience or an operator use. So if you get some questions that you're not quite sure why they've asked you this, maybe go up and check to make sure that you've specified a previous question correctly. And you can put in any kinds of discounts or things here. A lot of different questions based on the information of the driver and the vehicle. We've got our limits, and notice that we can't change these here. But in this case, I can. So I finished up with this vehicle, and maybe I want to add a second one, but it doesn't have to be that difficult. I can actually select this vehicle, my first one, vehicle 1, and then go to copy, because perhaps it's the same kind of vehicle. I just have two different versions of it. And if this is the case, it automatically generates the information and calls it vehicle 2, so all I have to do is change the VIN number. This could be very useful if you're dealing with a fleet of cars, perhaps. And it's kind of a pain with the VIN number, but you'll regret later not putting the information in. So it gives all the same information that I put in for vehicle 1. So I'd go through and double check to see if I needed to change anything, and then just hit next. And now I have two vehicles, and I can continue doing this as many times as I want until I'm done with vehicles. Finally, I'm going to have my additional coverages. This is, again, totally based on the policy quote that you're making. So the last part may go rather quickly. You may not have any of these at all. And you can see it automatically generates my silica dust-related dust liability, my emergency roadside service. If I have any additional interest, I'll add it here, and usually I've already specified this, additional interest holders or certificate holders. Again, as I'm going through and adding these in, I want to make sure that I'm being specific which they are and having the documentation to go along with it. When I reach this final page for premium summary, I know that I've reached the end of my quoting process. Now, up until now, I could use save and resume later if I wanted to exit and then come back in and add additional details. For example, maybe the system's running a little slow, or I just don't have all the information I need. But I haven't used calculate premium yet at all, and I won't until the very end of the quote. And the reason for this is because if I hit calculate premium before I have entered all of my information, it will actually generate a ton of errors. So you really don't want to use it until you get to this last page that says premium summary. And then it's going to generate all this information and tell me what my premium will be. Not to mention the fact if I start generating my premium, it might change later with the information that I put in and change. So here's my premium summary, and I can pull down and look at all the different details for Fred Smith with my commercial, auto, and business owners. It has it detailed here. And my green box here tells me I'm good to go, that there are no errors, and gives me the overall premium. So I hit next. And this is my final page where I can find a lot of good information. For example, I can find my quoted premium, taxes, fees, and surcharge, my expiration date. It says it's ready for billing. So what I'm going to do is just take a look, pull down a little bit more here, and take a look at this billing tab. And that is where I can change any billing specifications that I want. In this case, I'm just going to leave it on annual. And so I have all my information in here, my applicant information, producer, and so forth. So I have everything in. I'm going to hit complete, which means it will now go to the underwriter for review. And if they have any questions, they will contact you generally by email and ask you to give them specifics. If you don't hear from them, you can kind of assume that the policy has gone through and that there are no trouble. It's a bit of no news is good news. And you're done with this portion, and you may not take a look at it again until you go in to revise it, or if you needed to add an endorsement. And that ends our training video on how to create a BOP policy.